I need some traction.
So as we are going to talk about usage-based pricing, I want to do a quick poll of the room. Who has like a traditional seat-based subscription model? Raise your hand. All right, we might shame you a little bit. Not too much hazing on this panel though. Who has a usage-based model? Okay, good number. And who has something in between or hasn't figured out pricing yet? And I feel like we all haven't really figured out pricing yet, right? Let's be honest. It's something that's constantly changing. Well, regardless of what model you have, I'm hoping that you can take something away from this session. And I did want to start with Puneet. And there is this movement towards usage-based models. We've seen a number of companies start to adjust, implement usage-based pricing for the first time. Why do you think that is? What do you think is driving this change, and why now?
Yeah, I think, so just a little bit of background, because I'm going to make some bold statements, so I'll back it up a little bit with just personal experience. I spent a little bit of time at AWS in the early days, back in 2011. Had a team there, built a couple of AWS services, Amazon Cloud Search, Amazon Elasticsearch. So that's a little bit of background about speaking on the behest of usage-based pricing, billing, and so forth. But I think the reason it's happening, and I think it's happening, at least from my vantage point, sooner than what we thought that it would sort of catch this windfall, is ultimately it is a more fair and transparent business model. It is a win-win business model. Finally, something has arrived on stage that truly is a win-win. Okay, and you don't have to take my word for it, but like I said, just look at the trajectory of AWS and other companies that have followed. If this was not the case, they would have dialed it back many years ago. If anything, if you look further closely, let's just speak on AWS, they're continuing to add new products, new portfolios farther up the stack, even things like applications. And those types of applications also, they're disrupting with a usage-based business model. So customers love it, it's better for them. Vendors like it, it's better for them. We can go drill down into the specifics of what are those benefits, but at the end of the day, it is a win-win model. It takes out the friction from adoption, and it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, maybe we go from macro to micro, and Bonney, you've seen this play out before. You're COO of mParticle, and before that, SVP at New Relic, really leading this transition towards consumption-based business models. What was your experience, and why have these companies been interested in adopting a consumption-based model?
I think for New Relic, at the time, what we realized was there was a moment. What we were asking customers to do to get value out of the platform was to send us more data. And we were actually, through our pricing model, inadvertently discouraging them from sending us more data. And so without the full data picture, instrumentation across their entire stack, which was the vision we had to give you full visibility, customers were opting out, like, oh, we're not going to instrument this, or we're going to not instrument here, and kind of choose to be flying blind in some areas because of our pricing. So we were actually discouraging our customers from doing what we wanted them to do through our pricing model. And so the moment came was that we want to encourage them to send as much data as possible, and we have to make that as cheap and as kind of low margin for us as possible to drive that. And then we were able to disaggregate that from the value, the connection of the data, the visualization of the data, the insights from the data, and charge a premium for that. So I do think for us, it was a realization about where our customers were getting value and how we charge more for those parts and less for the parts where they're not getting value. So I think that's a really key part of usage-based pricing, is deeply understanding where your customers are getting value out of your product and making sure you're pricing that appropriately, margin and basis, from a profitability basis, but making sure you're not charging them for something that's going to scale out of proportion with value. So that was a big driver for New Relic in terms of that decision to go to UBP, which at 10 years, 11 years, 12 years into our history was a tough time to make that change. It was a huge pivot and a huge transformation across the entire business. So I would encourage you not to wait that long to be thinking about this, because obviously it's better to get that ingrained in your DNA, sooner rather than later.
And on the flip side of that, I guess, Krishna, in your experience as founder and CEO of SupportLogic, you're creating a new category, and you're potentially educating that category about how to buy, and why usage models might make sense. So what got you interested in usage-based pricing in a new category?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for the record, we don't have usage-based pricing at this point. We're actively looking into it. But what is prompting us to looking into usage-based pricing, as you pointed out, when you're selling a new category, the customers don't have a budget line item for it, right? So you go and try to sell them, hey, here's a 500K ACV spend you're going to do. There's a lot of friction in an unknown category, an unknown product for them to, and they love the product. I mean, when people see your demo, they absolutely love the product. But then the friction point comes in, oh, I have to commit to 500K to move forward. So we started trying to do, okay, let's do proof of value, and proof of value could be a very low entry price point proof of value, and then you can do the big sale. But even in that case, even in a proof of value, after the end of the proof of value, they have to commit to a big jump in price. So we're starting to think about what if we let customers grow and scale their usage. And we have high degree of confidence in our product adoption, and we have zero churn in our history of the company, and adoption metrics are pretty strong. So we are thinking, okay, maybe it's time for us to give the product and let the customers scale their usage on their own timeline. So if you look at many sales process, right, people use this framework called BANT, budget, authority, need, and timing. We don't have problems with reaching the right authority. We have no issues with convincing the users that they have a need for the product. And the B and T becomes the friction point. The B is, okay, do I have budget for it? And T is, I don't have time, I have many projects. And the B and T are kind of linked together because people say, I don't have time. They're saying, I don't have time to justify the investment in the 100K or whatever the price point that you have at this juncture. So when you let them grow on their own scale, I think we expect the B and T friction points can be resolved. So that's what's prompting us to go in this direction.
And I mean, it's interesting to think about usage-based pricing because in theory, it's the most customer-friendly model out there. You're not paying if you're not seeing value. But is every customer ready for usage-based pricing? Is it really customer-friendly in all cases? Maybe, Bonney, what's been your experience there?
I think for enterprise, the question is perhaps not all the time, right? Because I think, typically functional owners or team owners or leaders are going to have a set budget, and they have to, demonstrate predictability, and they have to demonstrate, hey, I can only spend, 100,000 or $1 million or whatever it is. So I think there are ways to do usage-based pricing that does give the buyer flexibility. So I would say that's kind of more of a hybrid. We called it at New Relic consumption with commit. So there was still an upfront commitment. There was a projection of, okay, we think we're going to use this much. We're not going to penalize you for going over, but you're going to be able to commit, and then you're going to be able to kind of forecast, and we'll show you as your usage is trending kind of where you're burning hot or burning cold. So I do think for commercial, for startups, for SMBs, it makes a whole lot of sense because they don't tend to have those kind of big budgeting processes and requisition processes. But I do think for enterprise, pure consumption isn't always the most attractive from a kind of financial planning perspective. So I think, but you need to separate how a customer purchases, which is we call the buying program. So it's a pay-as-you-go or it's a consumption with commit, versus the actual model, which is still consumption-based. So that's the distinction we made at New Relic, and I think it's an effective one for enterprise.
Yeah, one quick comment there is, one of the things, I've been thinking about this for a while. I know we don't have practical experience like you do. The one thing that I found it attractive is that now we're given the control on the cost back to the customer, and the customer can claw back usage if they have concerns, right? And especially when we have this economic concerns right now, this gives a little bit of assurance because when you do contract commitment, you committed to it, and there's no way to claw back, right? This one allows them to start use, if they like it, and then the team overuses it, they can claw back. And it's completely under their control. And to me, that seems very customer friendly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And Puneet, you've seen this, whether it's at AWS or now as founder and CEO of Amberflow and helping companies move towards usage-based pricing. What are some of these strategies to overcome objections?
Yeah, I would say I slightly disagree with Bonney. I think the landscape is changing. I think more and more enterprises are okay with usage-based pricing. The issue is, which you did call out, people do want a level of visibility and predictability. And from my experience, the lack of visibility and predictability is not a limitation of the usage-based model itself. If anything, you can probably chalk it up to simply growing pains, or you don't have the right tooling and infrastructure in place to give that level of visibility and predictability. So that's one way to kind of contextualize this. And within that, you have these frameworks, as you already articulated. You can do these prepaid credits or prepaid commits. And it's a good, happy balance, happy medium to get the predictability and also get the advantages of usage-based pricing and billing. In terms of how do you make this happen, there are actually frameworks. You don't have to kind of do this sort of hand-wavy. It is not a shot in the dark. There's literally defined blueprints. Neura, like you, probably have some stories to share about how you went about it, but a great place to start for usage-based pricing. You have to first understand it. It is more than pricing and billing. It's more of a data pipeline problem. You have to look at it from that lens. And the first thing you have to do is actually put in an infrastructure in place to do usage instrumentation, aka metering. You don't even have to know what your usage-based pricing, customer-facing price plan ought to be. Start by putting usage instrumentation, have that discipline. From that data and those insights will actually lead you towards determining what your right pricing plan would be. Again, an anecdote that I can share to back that statement. Think of all the, I don't know, at this point, there's probably about 400 plus AWS services that have launched. And I challenge you, find one instance out there where they had to retract the pricing plan for any one of the services. So this is not a, hey, will this work or not? There's a systematic approach that you can take, and you can be successful with it.
When we first met, I wanted to say, like, where were you? Where were you? Because I think it's a really important point for those of you who are even thinking about this in your future, or it's more urgent. It turns out it's actually really hard to count things. Like, I really need you to all internalize that. You think all this stuff's in the database, it should be really easy, and it turns out it's not. And it does really require the whole company, the product team, the data teams, the sales teams working together to figure out, like, what are we going to count and how we're going to count it. And I didn't have Amberflow at my disposal when we were doing it this New Relic. We had to patch it together with, like, Kafka topics and Snowflake and a few other, duct tape and baling wire. But it took, a whole mindset shift from our product team just to understand how they were going to need to instrument their own product to count what they were sending off in terms of, events or metrics or users. And it took us a long time just to figure out that part of the problem. I mean, the pricing and the multiplier is not the hard part. It's counting. And then I think setting up your data pipelines first and getting that data flowing to do modeling and planning and understanding value is a great first step, and something that I think people forget. They jump right to the pricing and how much money we're going to make and what margin we're going to have. And I think a great place to start is just figuring out how your customers are using your product and where that data is flowing.
Well, let's keep down this topic. So when we're thinking about moving towards usage-based pricing or changing pricing models, so obviously you've got to get the data, you've got to instrument it the right way, be measuring it, and then Krishna, what's the journey look like from there? What are the next steps?
Next steps for
coming up with and implementing a usage-based pricing model.
So, and I think maybe Puneet is probably the expert here of three. I mean, we are considering it right now. The very first step we're looking at is let's look at the general usage metrics. We're just pulling this, and we'll have, as we speak, have an Excel sheet on my computer, and I'm staring at the Excel sheet, like how the usage metrics looks across our customers. And also, I'm trying to map it, like what the contract size of those customers is, the usage correlate with the contract size. So this kind of basic modeling exercise that I'm undergoing, because this is a significant change for a company. It's not an easy thing to do because every stakeholder is in the company is involved, everyone from product and engineering from an instrumentation perspective, and then you have finance and operations from billing perspective, and then you have sales and marketing from a GTM perspective. It's not an easy change to make, right? So I don't want people to walk away thinking that, okay, you can do this overnight. You have to do a little bit of thinking. So that's the exercise we're doing in terms of modeling it and see where we stand. So the numbers actually paints a very, very interesting story. I think Bonney or somebody mentioned it some time back. As you're starting instrumenting and collecting data, you identify some patterns in your customer behavior that you completely overlooked, right? And then you get new insights from those patterns, and that make you think about what product changes you want to make and stuff like that. So that's a phase we are in. We're in very, very early in that cycle, so I'll let you guys speak about your journey.
Yeah, I'll add to that a little bit. I think, so there is a framework, like I said, and in all fairness, yes, it is certainly a heavier lift compared to just bringing a few PMs together in a room for a couple of hours and you decide, fine, we're going to charge $50 per user per month, and we go from there. So it's certainly a little bit more involved, but
I think that hit close to home for some people.
Yeah. Okay, but it's like I said, it's a worthwhile investment. At some point, you're going to have to do it. Our thesis is that it is coming. Whatever your posture is today with respect to usage-based pricing, things are going in that direction. If you're not doing it, probably your incumbents or up-and-coming startups are probably coming in that space with that model. It's the sooner you make that investment, start with the data pipeline, data infrastructure. I won't sort of belabor the point, but at least for how we used to do it at AWS, we've published that playbook. There's an article on TechCrunch called How Do You Do Usage-Based Pricing AWS Style. If you actually want to see some systematic blueprints, what's step 1, step 2, step 3, just research that. That'll give you some insights on what is kind of at least one path to get to the finish line.
Yeah, one more thing also I want to add is don't underestimate investment in customer success and support, because now you will be directly tying your adoption of the product to revenue. So far, adoption is only seen from the lens of churn, but this is going to directly affect revenue, because if there's no adoption, your consumption drops. There is a support issue that blocks you from people using the product, your consumption drops, so direct impact on revenue. So I think that's also an important factor to consider.
Well, and it's one thing to think about moving to usage-based pricing when you're early in your journey. It's another to do it when you're larger, especially in the eye of the public market. I've only seen one company pull it off, and that's New Relic. And so congrats, Bonney and team. I'm sure a lot of hard work went into that. What are some of the challenges that you might not have expected, or folks in this room might not realize they're about to go through when they're making this transition?
So one, I would say, understanding cost is not easy. I think AWS doesn't always make it easy for you to understand, which services and what discounts. So, you do need to spend some time there, and sometimes you do have to make some guesses, right? You just have to do your best. And deeply understanding your margins, I think, is really critical to understanding the value you're delivering, and again, what behaviors and what you want your customer to be doing and not inhibited to do. On the business side, right, because there's a whole other part of the business that needs to transform as well. Really thinking, depending on where you are in your journey, if you have sales and customer success people, I think one of the beautiful things about a usage-based pricing model is theoretically, hypothetically, your salespeople and your CS people should be now totally aligned in what they're trying to deliver, right? Theoretically, there isn't this handoff, there isn't this like, well, it was your fault, or your fault, you set up a bad deal, or you didn't do what you needed to do. Theoretically, you should be incenting everyone in your go-to-market organization to drive adoption and continued usage, adoption of different use cases, hopefully bringing other divisions along. So I think spend some time thinking about what's going to change about your go-to-market teams and how they work together and what their roles and responsibilities are if you have those functions already. That might be one person today, so it may not be an issue.
So this is already happening for us, right? So we're starting already discussing, should we rename our account execs as account managers? Because account execs implies they land the logo and then they walk away. right? And you want to tell them that's not the case anymore. Your comp is going to be dependent on how the customers grow. So we're thinking of, okay, let's retitle them as account managers or something else. I know Snowflake does this. Snowflake has probably one of the best examples for consumption-based pricing. The account managers do everything. They don't have CSMs. That's on the other extreme side. The account managers are the CSMs on Snowflake side. So I think that's the psychological shift you need to think through is also very important. I think that's, and don't underestimate the internal friction that you will go through.
Yeah. And then I would say, you have to provide visibility both to your customers and to your internal teams about usage, right? So you have the usage data. How are you going to surface that? In the customer interface, how are you going to help that customer have confidence that they have control and have the transparency that you promised them? And then providing that same information to your internal teams. That's getting easier to do with lots of different tools. And then I think compensation is a huge one. I would say at New Relic, I think one of the things we probably could have been more aggressive about is shifting the compensation model a bit more aggressively to kind of full UBP sooner. I think we were just worried. We were a $750 million company. We're, a public company. We can't have things just go bump, right? We had to manage that transition. But I think in retrospect, the team feels like we probably could have been more aggressive in terms of moving more to like a Snowflake model. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of where you can be in terms of how you commission your sales reps. But I think, don't be afraid. Don't make decisions out of fear, especially if you're early, right? I mean, I think you can take more risks. So, that's a big shift though. When you shake someone's pyramid, their compensation is the heart of their livelihood. You have to take that change seriously, and you have to communicate, and you have to get everyone on board. So that's a really important part of the business transformation that you have to drive when you do a UBP transformation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, it's scary for reps, right? If they go from if they go from getting paid as soon as they close a deal and getting full quota relief for that to, hey, great, you closed this deal, but you're only getting paid on consumption when people actually use the product. There's no more like ring the bell moment because victory isn't signing the deal. It's driving consumption.
Yeah, and you're asking them to go from big whale hunters to like putting out a net. That's a big change in their mentality. So I think net long-term is a great model, but it's a big change for someone who's used to being a big whale hunter, which a lot of enterprise reps are.
Yeah. Also, you can't take. This is my hypothesis when we're still trying it out, right? You can't have the sales team take a half-hearted approach on this one. You can't be half pregnant and try to do this. So if you do this, the comp plan and everything should be fully aligned, and they should feel very comfortable that they'll walk away with more money with this usage-based pricing model than the old school model, right? I think so. You have to really think through the comp.
I think, and good news is there's now, I think there's a lot of companies have already done this. So there's a set of folks out there, salespeople, sales teams who've already gone through this business model. And if you're thinking of shifting in the direction, I would encourage, go find some of those folks who've already lived on the backs of this. And this really, the value in usage-based or the drawdown for sales teams is the compounding effect. And those who have lived it, who've come from these companies, they know that in the long term, it really, drives greater dividends.
Yeah, it's a big change, but thankfully there's enough companies that have gone through this change that you won't be the first if you're thinking about this. Maybe going back to Puneet, what are some other ways that this process of scaling with a usage model looks different from a traditional subscription company, which could create even opportunities for folks to scale faster than their peers?
Yeah, I guess I'll share a lesson again back from AWS. So if you just think back, why AWS even started with usage-based pricing. At some point, even AWS was a single product company and started with a single service. They could have just as well done a different model. The thesis was that this usage-based model really gives you insights into what your customers are doing. So that is something that I think folks sometimes maybe after the fact appreciate, that is really the underlying driving factor. And again, for those of you who may know a little bit about AWS or Amazon culture, I mean, there was never a question that, yes, we can build good products. We are customer obsessed, so we will continue to innovate and bring new products to market. But we wanted to have that direct loop of what is being used, what is being utilized, and just as well what is not being used and not being utilized, so we could optimize and keep our pace of innovation and new products delivery. If you think about what I just said, that really is the AWS story, why they have been able to scale and continue to innovate and bring new products to market. Don't underestimate the aspect of the usage-based business model driving that velocity. So for product teams, I would certainly point you in that direction.
Well, I think it sounds like it's all about incentive alignment, right? So if you're building more products that drive consumption or building a better user experience that drives folks to use the product more often, you can see the impact in terms of revenue. That even can apply to the support experience, right? Maybe Krishna, you could share more about your experience there, because it's something where we've always seen it as a cost center, but support can also play a role in driving that consumption. Yeah,
I think irrespective of usage-based pricing, the product-led growth model approach really has changed support from a cost center to a revenue center. And the fact is very simple. A lot of companies have product that you can try before you buy. So when you try the product, often the first contact point that you do is support. And if your support experience sucks, that's your first experience for the customer, and they probably won't even buy your product, right? And then similarly, the product usage and adoption can be hindered if the support issues are not resolved in a timely fashion. So that also affects your expansion revenue. And then retention revenue is the same. So support experience has become the brand experience. I think it's only going to get more accelerated by the fact that companies are also going to usage-based pricing, because now there is an immediate impact that you're going to see in the invoice that's coming up in the next month from your customers because their adoption is blocked because of a support issue. So an escalation from a customer, it's not just a support escalation, it's actually a revenue escalation now. Right, I think so. I think that the role of support is going to be super important going forward.
Well, and let's wrap up with a rapid fire question here. What's one final piece of advice you would have for folks in this room thinking about usage-based pricing? Puneet, we can start with you.
I would say, there's a lot of talk about this whole PLG, product-led growth initiative movement. I would profess and say that if you are thinking about that, and I think many companies are, you would, from my perspective, PLG doesn't exist without usage-based pricing. Because if you're going, product-led, have customers land on your product and drive adoption, you want to really sort of streamline that full loop and back that up with usage-based pricing to just kind of take them all the way through to the finish line. So I would encourage you to kind of think of those two things together in the same realm.
And Bonney?
Don't do it for the wrong reasons. Don't do it because you don't feel like the revenue line's growing fast enough. Don't do it because your margins suck. Do the work and figure out where your customers are getting value and figure out a usage-based model that works for them. So I think just be anchored on what you're trying to drive, which is customer adoption through a realization of value, not through kind of a fear-based motivation. Because when you think about how you can align the whole company, product, go-to-market, support, CS, sales, along this kind of driving usage, it's such a unifying way to get everyone driving to customer value. So I think just make sure you're doing it and starting from a good first principle when you move to the model.
All right, and then Krishna, you have the final word. Bring us home.
I'm going to agree with Bonney, right? I think don't do it for your CFO, do it for your customers. Right? This has to make sense for your customers, and customers should tell you this is a better model than what you have today, then it makes sense. That's what is going to drive the adoption of usage-based pricing. The other thing also, to coupling on your point, right? I like the fact that if a company goes to usage-based pricing, entire company can be aligned on one metric, and that's adoption. Today, product teams are measured by a different metric. Sales teams are measured by revenue. Customer success are measured by net dollar retention and churn. Very different metrics. It becomes very difficult as a CEO to figure out where to rally the company in one direction. And I think putting entire company adoption, because product drives adoption, there is a revenue impact. Customer success drives adoption, there's a revenue impact. It's beautiful. And that's one of the things I really like about the usage-based pricing.
All right, well, I don't know if this was everything you need to know about usage-based pricing, but this at least starts us off. Well, thank you, Bonney, thank you, Puneet, and thank you, Krishna.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.